In an Easter address he gave in the 1920s, former minister here, John Dietrich, said this, quote, "It does not frighten me to know that the universe has made me a part of its teeming, abundant life, that the same power that is breaking the lilacs into leaf is breaking me into a fuller flower of personality. I am content to be a brother to the leaves, the flowers, the trees, and to all the strange and beautiful world in which I dwell. It does not sadden me to realize that for a little while the cosmic urge voices itself in the strange community of busy particles which I call myself. In me, in you, the universe has spoken." End quote. And then he goes on to say, "We often speak as if there are two worlds, a natural world and a human world, but humanity is only a wrinkle or a smile upon the rugged face of Mother Nature. Of all the quaint and curious isms people in their ingenuity have thought out, I know of none so satisfying in certain moods as pantheism, the thinking that says that God and nature are one, that we are children of the living universe, that we are a chapter in nature's endless book." End quote. What I want to consider on this Earth Day weekend is a transition in thought, a transition away from our long human assertion that we are children of God to considering ourselves children of the cosmos. The Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi, who lived from 370 to 287 BCE, told this story. Once three friends were discussing life. One said, "Can people live together and know nothing of life? Work together and produce nothing? Can people fly around in the air and forget to exist forever and ever?" The three friends looked at each other and burst out laughing. They had no explanation, and so they were better friends than before. Then one of the friends died. Upon hearing of the death, Confucius sent a disciple to help the two remaining friends chant the funeral obsequies. Upon arrival, the Confucian found one of the friends had composed a song, and the other was playing on a lute. The two friends sang, "Hey, Sung Hu, where'd you go? Hey, Sung Hu, where'd you go? You have gone where you really were all along. And we are here, damn it, we are here." When the Confucian heard this, he burst into the room and said, "May I inquire where you found this in all the books of funeral obsequies, this silly singing in the presence of the dearly departed?" The two friends looked at each other and burst out laughing. One said, "Poor fellow, he doesn't know the new liturgy." Right? Now, I should explain that many Taoist tales, in those, the Confucians are usually the butts of the joke. Confucians were, and are today, all about formal ritual and decorum. Taoists, by contrast, believe in going with the flow and being in the moment. So, Taoist stories tend to underline spontaneity and creativity, and they contrast themselves against the Confucian uptightness. The three friends asked some fairly meaty questions. Can people live together and know nothing of life? Work together and produce nothing? Can people fly around in the air and forget to exist forever and ever? The three friends looked at each other and burst out laughing. They had no explanation, and so they were better friends than before. That, I think, fairly well sums up the project of humanist gatherings. We agree with the American poet Yusef Komunyaky, who said, "It is not what we know, It's what we can risk discovering. And our take on the formality of previous religious traditions among we humanists anyway. Poor fellow, he doesn't know the new liturgy. It is the work of humanism and free thought to create that new liturgy over and over, a liturgy that underlines and examines the fact that we are children of the cosmos. Perhaps we sometimes forget that all religious traditions start somewhere and sometime. Those who believe there is an ancient and immutable concept of deity just hasn't looked very closely at the DNA of the various gods. We have a version of the beginning of Christianity in the book of Acts in Christian scripture, which is properly titled the Acts of the Apostles, or in Greek, Praxis Apostolon. The book was written somewhere around 80 to 90 of the Common Era and contains the triumphalist story of the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Chapter 17 contains a narrative of the meeting of paganism, air quotes, paganism and Christianity from the Christian point of view. Quote, "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling and hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus," that's the hill of government, Capitol Hill of Athens, right? The Areopagus, and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, I will proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things." End quote. In coming to Athens, the epicenter of Greek philosophy, Paul's task was to convince the Athenians that they needed a transcendent God, a God above and outside of nature who is in charge of all things. This sort of God, Paul argued, is the only sort that can establish law and true meaning. One thing that's important to recognize is that the product that Paul was, if you will, selling in Athens was not an ancient God at all, but a brand spanking new hybrid God. All religions start somewhere, as I said before. Paul was creating a new sort of God right before the Athenians' eyes. As Paul well knew, theology is not merely talk about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Theology is how we construct a worldview, a life stance. Theology is where we find our hope and our meaning and our purpose. The question of deity, I think, boils down to this. Is there any management in this hotel? Can you ring the front desk and ask for extra towels? And, by golly, here they come. Or do you have to go get your own darn towels? Paul taught the former. Humanism embraces the latter. There are, broadly speaking, three types of gods that occur in human thought. A transcendent God is outside and above all things. In this way of seeing reality, there is a material world and a world of flesh, as Paul put it. And then there's that world of spirit, the realm of God and the angels and heaven and a throne and pearly gates and that sort of thing. With a transcendent God, the hotel has management. You can ask for towels, and if it pleases management, you will get them. The polar opposite of the transcendent God is an immanent God with an I immanent. The word immanent derives from the Latin word immanens, meaning to remain in. This sort of God exists in the material world and is most likely the oldest form of God in human thought, the God that is in the trees and the rocks and the animals and the clouds and on and on. The pantheism that John Dietrich referred to in the earlier quote, and what the average Athenian believed when Paul showed up. With this sort of management, you have to go get your own darn towels. The management is everything. You, the towels, the hotel, and your idea that you need extra towels. Then there is the third type of God, which begins in the material realm, but is more than an emergent God with an E, from the Latin emergentem, to rise out of. In this vision, there's no, for example, pearly gates or a throne, but there is a spiritual realm that we can't see, but we can feel sometimes, and it permeates the material universe. This vision appears to have originated in Hindu thought. The question about this sort of God is whether it only does things that, bring out the leaves in the springtime, or does it do other things as well, like affecting human history? With this sort of hotel management, you can call for extra towels if you feel so inclined, but the ultimate knowledge you can have is understanding that you don't need any extra towels anyway. You already have all the towels you need. So, there are, broadly speaking, three types of God in human thought: above and outside, in and only in and rising from. Humanists tend to choose between the last two, and many of us consider that the word nature is a whole lot more useful than that freighted word God. As the humanist architect Frank Lloyd Wright put it, I believe in God, only I spell it N-A-T-U-R-E. But, whatever, right? The three friends looked at each other and burst out laughing. They had no explanation, and so they were better friends than before. In your order of service this morning is a quote from Curtis Reese, a Unitarian minister, and he was a contemporary and a humanist co-conspirator of John Dietrich. He was also the first president of the American Humanist Association, and Reese wrote this: Humanism aims to comprehend humanity in our total setting, to know ourselves as children of the cosmos, as the individual members of the human group, and as the parents of civilizations yet to be. Or, as Dietrich put it in that quote I read earlier, that we are children of the living universe, that we are a chapter in nature's endless book. The early 20th century humanists called us back to that meeting of Paul and the pagans in Athens, and they said, Paul got it wrong. Now, when Paul made his speech, that altar to the unknown God in Athens was already 600 years old. It had seen a lot of gods come and go through the town. The 20th century humanists were saying, let's reconsider that day on the Areopagus. It's time for a do-over. Now, there are three claims for humanist thought in that Curtis Reese quote in your order of service this morning. Number one, we must realize that we are children of the cosmos. Two, we must act lovingly and responsibly as social animals. And three, we must realize and live into our obligation to secure the future of humanity, the planet, and all living things. That, as I see it, is the call of humanism, to live in compassionate relationship with yourself, others, and all living things. That I would call wholeness, which the kids figured out. We are human beings because we are in relationship. This is both our meaning and our purpose, and this commitment necessarily means we are living for something greater than ourselves. We are alive because of other people before us and with us now. Our lives must help ensure the flourishing of what comes after our lives. That, I think, is the big call of humanism and of Earth Day. Our call is to move from the fuzzy and confused values we learn in the jumble sale or the flea market of emotions and social norms and social values that swirl around us in this culture. We want to get to some clear values, clarified values that can serve us as truth and meaning and purpose. You know, our closing words here that we say each week include the line, "Do what makes you come alive." This is based on a quote by Howard Thurman, a great liberal preacher and one of the inspirations of Dr. Martin Luther King. The quote goes like this: "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And that's a very good question. What makes you come alive? The work of humanism is the work of liberation, first of our own minds, then those around us, and on in bigger and bigger circles. The work of humanism is the work of liberation until all of humanity is free to change their life circumstances, to free themselves from what they feel they must be free of, whatever that is. And our work will not be complete until that's all true. The work of humanism is living a shared life in a shared world and working toward greater and greater sharing and relationship. The work of humanism is going beyond the self into relationship in larger and larger circles. The work of humanism is multicultural and multiracial, pluralist and secular. We always must insist that religion and government go together like oil and water. The work of humanism is always paradoxical. We insist upon the inborn right and dignity of all people for justice. That's a universal value, while at the same time insisting that human cultures are all equally valid. And that's a pluralist value. And those two things don't ever fit well together. The work of humanism is the work of hope. Not the hope of far-off places in other realms, but the hope of here and now. Relationship, connection. We continue to ask the same questions those old Taoists did. Can people live together and know nothing of life, work together and produce nothing? Can people fly around in the air and forget to exist forever and ever? Or as John Dietrich said, "It does not frighten me to know that the universe has made me a part of its teeming, abundant life." So we sing along with those old Taoist friends. Hey, Sung-Hu, where'd you go? You've gone where you really were all along.